Hey, what's going on, guys? Gumby here. This week I've got another Razer Blade 14 benchmark video. I'm covering a game that a viewer on one of my last videos has requested. I'm looking at Planetside 2 this week. This is actually the first time I've ever played Planetside 2. I've been aware of it for a long time, since its inception, really. And I knew it was a free-to-play game, and I knew it was a first-person shooter, and I knew as well that it was unique in terms of how large of the instance size it was, how many players are playing at one time, and also the gunplay. I had heard that the gunplay is fairly difficult to get used to, and I can attest that it is. The gameplay that you're going to be watching today is not very good, just to warn you, but I'm not focusing on the gameplay. I'm not really focusing on the game. I'm more focused on how well it performs on the Razer Blade 14 hardware. I'm going to be going over 15 different tests. I couldn't find a 720p option in the resolution, so I'm looking at a 768p, 1080p, and 1800p. So those are three resolutions I'm looking at, and then I have very low, medium, high, and ultra settings. Those are the default graphical settings that you can set in this game. So I did all the graphic settings through three different screen resolutions for this laptop. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the review, starting at 768p at very low settings. Right off the bat, you're going to see that the frames are really good. For some reason I was getting capped at around 60 frames per second with this game. I'm not sure if it's the tick rate of the servers or what they use, or if it's just the fact that the instance types are so large and there's so many people playing this game at once that they cap your frames at around 60. So you see it dip a little bit under 55, but really it's staying at about 59 plus, 59, 60 frames this entire time. Even when I'm indoors, I'm around other people, I'm firing, I'm in combat, the frames don't really dip at all, and that's because we're at a low screen resolution and at the lowest graphical setting possible, so that's not to be unexpected. And so then moving on, we're on the same screen resolution, but now we're on the low graphical settings. We're at the same thing, 59 plus. We're outdoors now. There's a lot of people, a lot of explosions, vehicles around, but frames aren't dropping. Again, we're at low graphical settings, so you wouldn't expect them to drop, so it's still a good sign that they're not dropping this early, but it is expected. Moving now to medium graphical settings. So this is our first. We're looking at about 40 to 55, depending on where you are, whether you're indoors, surrounded by people, in combat, jumping around some complex geometries like these rocks. It's all dependent on what you're doing in the game and how many people are around you. So it's not surprising that now that our graphical settings are bumped up a little bit, the graphics actually look kind of decent. They're not blocky like they were in low and very low settings. That we're going to have a little bit of frame drops, but overall we're still sticking around 50, 55, so I'm still happy with the frames at medium graphical resolution. Moving to high now, we're at 44 to 56 frames per second. We're outside again, we're on these rocks, there's lots of combat going on. I'm probably surrounded by 20 or 30 people at this moment, and I'm sniping, so I'm hanging back a little bit, so that might attest to the fact that I can get still in those 50 or higher FPS for having a high graphical settings. But it's still lower screen resolution. I'm still happy with the frames that you're getting at this point, with getting a really nice, pretty gameplay with high graphics settings. Now, highest graphical settings on 768p screen resolution. We're looking at about 32 to 50 frames per second. It's really sticking about 45, 50 consistently, but it does drop to 32, so I wanted to include it. We're inside, we're outside, we're surrounded by people. Again, I'm sniping, but even rushing this guy, we're still looking at about 49, 50 frames per second, so that's still pretty decent for ultra graphics settings. Now we're bumping up our screen resolution here. We're at 1080p HD resolution, very low graphical settings. We're looking at about 55 to 59 plus, so it does dip to 55, but essentially we're sticking to that 60 frames per second range consistently, and most likely higher. Just Fraps wasn't really telling me higher than 60 frames, like I explained earlier. But like very low settings, so the graphics aren't pretty, but you are playing at 1080p now, and you're still getting that consistent 60. It's expected, and I'm happy about it. Moving to low settings now, it's still 1080p. And we're looking at about 52 to 59 plus, so still, like I said, it does dip to 52 when I'm jumping around these mountains, around these complex geometries, and I have teammates around me, and there's rockets coming up, and enemies rocket boosting up as well. But overall, it's still sticking to around that 55, 60 frame per second range. I'm completely happy with that for this game, but it's a low graphics setting, so it's not quite as pretty as you want to be looking at if you're going to be playing a game like this consistently. Medium settings. Same as with the last screen resolution, this is where we're getting our first real frames per second drop. Looking at about 47 to 59 plus frames, so it does dip down like I said, but even with 1080p, it's still sticking around that 60 frames per second. It's the same scenario as the last time. We're outside, we're climbing these mountains, we're around teammates, but also around enemies. So there's a lot of different things happening at once that cause a frame drop, but I'm still real happy with its performance. Looking at high graphical settings on 1080 resolution, we're getting about 45, 59 plus frames per second. We're actually getting a much better performance out of 1080p resolution. I think it's just a more common resolution than the first one that I had tested, but it's about as close as I could get to 720p like my normal tests. So we're getting really good graphics settings. This is more open, but we were moving pretty quickly on the RV, so that's probably where a lot of frame drops. Here I'm running around a corridor, and we're looking at 58, 57, 59 frames per second. I'm in battle, dips a little bit, but still really crisp, really nice, really smooth. Now, ultra graphics, 30, 42 frames per second. It's definitely playable. I like the high settings better. You're still getting very pretty game. You have HD resolution, and your graphics are more consistent around 60 frames. Moving to our last resolution, 1800p, very low. You're looking at about 55, 60 frames per second. So that's a good consistency of frames, but it's very low settings, and everything's very small at 1800p. And I've explained it before. I don't like how small this stuff gets. The higher your screen resolution gets because of how small the laptop is at 14 inches. Moving to low graphics settings, we're seeing the dip now at low and not medium. 44, 60 frames. We're still getting those 60s, but that was more when I was alone. I wasn't really in combat, and I wasn't around teammates or any enemies, so it's really more consistent around 44 frames. Medium, this is where you show that you shouldn't be playing this game at 1800p. 24 to 41 frames per second. This is a crazy drop than what we're used to. There's a lot going on, but at 1800p screen resolution, it's very small, doesn't make the game that much prettier, and it's almost unplayable. High graphics settings, 16 frames to 32 frames per second. Just I wouldn't play the game at this resolution. It's not worth the change between 1080p to 1800p, and it's just unplayable. It's so slow and laggy, and I just jump down the pit, just quit. You're just not going to be able to play it like this. And then the next and the last ultra graphics setting, 1800p. Watch this right now. Ready? I know I'm invisible, but apparently so is the Earth. That was insane. You're looking at 17 to 26 frames per second here. I only played at this for a few minutes because I knew that's all I really needed to record. It's so terrible. Don't do it. It's unplayable. Honestly, if you want to play this game at a nice resolution with very pretty graphics. Look, I can't even hit these guys because can't even move my mouse. Anyway, suggestions. If you want to play at a low resolution 768p, you can play at any resolution really. Maybe not ultra because the frames do dip a little bit. But if you really want to play that, do any graphical settings at that resolution. Doesn't really matter. My suggestion though for this game 1080p, high graphical settings. It's very smooth, very pretty. Didn't have much issues. And honestly, if 1800p is very important to you, play it on very low or maybe low graphical settings. But your game's not very pretty, it's blocky. I wouldn't suggest it. For the heating for this laptop, I didn't actually have really any heat issues. I didn't play on 1800p very long, like I said, because the performance wasn't there and it's not really worth talking about. But in terms of 1080p consistent play, I think for these tests, I played about 3 or 4 hours constant on this laptop. I didn't have one crash or one heating issue at all. So the game runs very well on this laptop. Just be choosy about what resolution you want to be using and what graphical setting you want to be using. Like I said, my suggestion is 1080p on high graphical settings. In case you missed any of these videos that I've done in the past, I have a whole series on this in the playlist. I'll link the playlist in the top right of the video right now. There will be an info card if you want to check that out. And like I said, this game was a suggestion by a viewer, so if you have any games that you're looking forward to or are wondering whether your laptop can play it, just go ahead, leave a comment in the description. If I own the game, I will definitely do the test, and if I don't own it, I'm always out looking for a sale or something to purchase new games, so I will try to make it work for you. Just please, like I said, let me know in the comments. and I'll let you know if I'm able to do that for you. I think next I'm going to be doing Assassin's Creed Syndicate, so look out for that coming up in the next week or so. But thanks for checking out this video, guys. I hope it helped. I hope your day is beer and Skittles, and as always, thank you for tuning in.